Imagine a city consumed by an invisible mania. Not a riot, not a religious frenzy, but a spontaneous, unending, and utterly terrifying urge to move. A compulsion so profound that it became a death sentence. In the summer of 1518, in the cobblestone streets of Strasbourg, a nightmare took hold. It began with one woman, spinning alone in the street. Within weeks, dozens joined her. They did not stop to eat, drink, or sleep. Their faces were masks of exhaustion, their feet bloody, and their movements frantic, involuntary, and desperate. This was not a festival. This was not joy. It was a plague of motion, a historical reality so bizarre and chilling that it sounds like fiction. A true story of when hundreds of people literally danced themselves to death. This is the historical account of the dancing plague of 1518, an epidemic of involuntary choreography that consumed the medieval city of Strasbourg, now in modern France, a medical and psychological phenomenon that remains one of the most astonishing unsolved mysteries in human history. The first step, Frau Trophäa and the quiet madness. The city of Strasbourg, nestled along the Rhine River in the Holy Roman Empire, was in July 1518 a place already burdened by hardship. Famine had gripped the region, leaving the populace weakened and tense. Feudal society was rife with inequality, and the spiritual anxieties of the time, plagues, poverty, and the looming shadow of the Reformation, created an atmosphere ripe for collective hysteria. On a warm day around July 14, 1518, the quiet tension broke. A woman named Frau Trophäa, or Trophia, stepped out of her humble home onto a narrow, unpaved street. She began to dance. This was not a graceful or celebratory movement. It was jerky, manic, and desperate. She moved her arms and legs with frantic energy, twitching and swaying, seemingly unable to control her own muscles. Neighbors watched, bemused, and then alarmed as the woman continued her strange, silent solo performance. Frau Trophäa danced all day. She danced through the night. By the next morning, her feet were raw, her clothes were soaked with sweat, and her body was visibly weakening, yet she could not or would not stop. She was not dancing to music, and she showed no sign of enjoyment. Her expression was one of terror and exhaustion. By the end of the first week, about a dozen other people in the city had joined her. They were pulled into the vortex of motion, starting slowly, then accelerating into a tireless, agonizing shuffle and jerk. Historian John Waller, in his meticulous research on the event, notes that this was not a matter of choice. The sufferers appeared to be in the grip of a powerful, uncontrollable force. They writhed, stomped, and leaped. The authorities were baffled. Strasbourg was accustomed to sickness, leprosy, the occasional outbreak of the real plague, but a dancing affliction? This was something new and terrifying. The medical mandate, dancing as the cure. As the number of afflicted rose to over 50 people by the end of July, the city magistrates and physicians had to intervene. They convened to diagnose and treat this unprecedented epidemic. Their conclusion, based on the medical knowledge of the time, was shockingly wrong and tragically consequential. The doctors of Strasbourg ruled out supernatural causes, attributing the condition to a hot blood, an overheating of the brain and blood that could only be cured further by movement. The prevailing wisdom, deeply rooted in humoral theory, dictated that the fever needed to be danced out of the body. Instead of ordering the dancers to rest, the authorities decided to facilitate their mania. They believed that if the dancers danced continuously, the frenzy would eventually burn itself out. In a grotesque display of municipal misjudgment, the magistrates issued an official decree. They cleared the guild halls, constructed a large wooden stage, and even hired professional musicians, fife and drums, to play lively music and keep the afflicted moving. The logic was perverse. Since the dancing was involuntary, and since more dancing was the prescribed cure, they must ensure the dancing continued uninterrupted. The sight was unimaginable. The city's healthy population, the magistrates, the musicians, the concerned onlookers, stood by, essentially providing the soundtrack and venue for a mass suicide by choreography. The height of the crisis, a deathly rhythm. The intervention did not stem the tide, it amplified it. The staging and the music provided a focus, a ritualistic gravity that made the hysteria spread even faster. With a public venue and a ceaseless, driving rhythm, the plague exploded. By early August, the number of dancers swelled to over 400 people. Men, women, and children were caught in the grip of the foot fever. The scene was pure chaos. Physical deterioration. The dancers' bodies were pushed far beyond human limits. Their clothing was ripped, their feet bled through their shoes, and were often ground down to the bone. They suffered from severe dehydration, exhaustion, and muscle spasms. The constant movement led to broken bones, heart attacks, and strokes. The unseeing eye. Witnesses described the dancers as being in a trance-like state. They wept, screamed, and begged for help, yet they could not cease moving. They appeared to be terrified of their own bodies, driven by a fear far greater than the pain they were enduring. The death toll. The most horrifying consequence was the mortality rate. Historical chronicles from the period report that at the height of the epidemic, people were dying at a rate of up to 15 people per day. They were dancing themselves to death from sheer physical exertion, cardiac arrest, and total metabolic collapse. The stench of sweat, blood, and eventual death hung heavy over the squares. The original premise that the dancers simply needed to sweat out the fever was proven tragically false. The cure had become the catalyst for an unparalleled public health catastrophe. The physicians realized, too late, that they had simply fueled the fire.
The spiritual intervention and retreat. The mass deaths finally forced the authorities to change course. The initial medical explanation was discarded in favor of a spiritual one. The population, already susceptible to superstition, concluded that the dancers were afflicted by a divine curse, perhaps sent by Saint Vitus, a Christian martyr often associated in popular culture with twitching and epileptic seizures. The new remedy was spiritual, not medical. Halt the music. The stages were torn down and the musicians were ordered to stop playing immediately. The atmosphere of carnival and performance was instantly stripped away. Exile the afflicted. The remaining dancers, those still alive and moving, were bundled onto carts and forcibly removed from Strasbourg. They were taken to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, located in a remote mountain cave near the town of Severn. The ritual. At the shrine, priests performed a special exorcism and ritualistic treatments. The dancers were made to wear red shoes, which were then consecrated with holy water and oil, a symbolic act intended to reverse the curse. This spiritual, environmental, and psychological intervention worked. Away from the crowded, high-tension atmosphere of Strasbourg, deprived of the constant, driving rhythms of the drums, and placed within a quiet, powerful context of religious ritual and devotion, the remaining dancers began to recover. Their terrifying, involuntary movements gradually subsided. By September, the phenomenon had completely disappeared. The fever of the feet had passed, leaving behind a baffled population, bewildered authorities, and over 100 fresh graves. The modern scientific verdict: stress and suggestibility. For centuries, the dancing plague was viewed as an inexplicable curiosity or dismissed as an exaggeration of folklore. However, modern historical research and neuropsychiatric study have proposed a far more plausible, yet equally frightening explanation. The prevailing scientific consensus is that the dancing plague of 1518 was a massive outbreak of psychogenic illness, also known as mass psychogenic illness, or MPI, triggered by a confluence of extreme physical and psychological stress. The preconditions of stress. Historian John Waller highlights that the region around Strasbourg in 1518 was suffering from a perfect storm of misery. Famine and malnutrition, years of failed harvests had led to starvation and widespread vitamin deficiency, weakening the physical and mental state of the populace. Disease and death. Previous outbreaks of syphilis and other diseases had raised anxiety levels to a breaking point. Superstition and fear. The medieval mind was constantly attuned to signs of divine wrath or demonic possession, especially during times of mass death. These factors created a population whose nervous systems were stretched to the absolute limit. The role of the hysterical trance. In such a fragile state, the mind can snap. Modern scientists believe that the dancers entered a form of stress-induced hysteria or dissociative trance. Frau Trophea, under immense pressure, might have suffered a severe panic attack or a neurological breakdown that manifested as involuntary movement. Once she began dancing, the intense societal stress, combined with the explicit instruction to keep moving, validated the hysteria. The initial diagnosis by the doctors that the fever must be danced out provided a culturally sanctioned framework for the frenzy. The victims, already terrified and physically weakened, internalized this diagnosis and, in a trance state, fulfilled the expectation. The music and the spectacle acted as a powerful positive feedback loop, drawing more people in and preventing those afflicted from breaking the trance. The ergotism theory, debunked. For a long time, an alternative theory suggested the cause was ergotism, a poisoning caused by consuming bread made from rye grain infected with the Claviceps purpurea fungus. Ergotism can cause convulsions, spasms, and hallucinations, known historically as St. Anthony's fire. However, the ergotism theory does not fit the evidence. Ergotism typically restricts blood flow, leading to gangrene and limb loss, not continuous, vigorous dancing. It causes vivid hallucinations and delirium, yet the historical accounts of the dancers focus on their exhausted distress, not on manic hallucinatory joy. It would have been unlikely to affect hundreds of people simultaneously without causing other more typical symptoms of poisoning. The MPI theory, rooted in extreme emotional distress and cultural suggestibility, remains the most robust explanation for this specific movement-based epidemic. The legacy of the foot fever. The dancing plague of 1518 was not an isolated incident. Historians have documented about 10 similar, though smaller, outbreaks across Europe between the 13th and 17th centuries, all characterized by involuntary hysterical dancing. The Strasbourg event, however, remains the largest and lethal. The story serves as a profound, chilling reminder of the raw power of the human mind and its connection to the body, especially when pushed to extremes. It shows how social context, cultural fear, and medical belief can shape the very way a disease, even a psychological one, is expressed and spread. The cobblestone streets of Strasbourg today offer no hint of the terrible summer of 1518, but the tragedy is etched into history. A real-life horror show where the fear and stress of an entire community manifested as an unstoppable physical compulsion. They were victims of a panic so severe, so overwhelming, that their own bodies became the agents of their destruction. The fever of the feet demonstrated that the mind, when broken by suffering, can command the body to execute its own agonizing demise. The question posed by the dancing plague remains: what are the limits of human endurance, and what terrifying forces lie dormant within the collective psyche, waiting for the right conditions, famine, fear, and desperation, to unleash a deadly, spontaneous dance?
The dancing plague, primary sources, and the cultural crucible.
To truly understand the horror of the dancing plague of 1518, one must look beyond the simple narrative of a mass psychological event and examine the detailed, often bewildered, accounts left by the contemporaries who witnessed the foot fever. These primary sources paint a picture not just of a physical affliction, but of a profound societal crisis. Chronicling the catastrophe, eyewitness accounts. The events in Strasbourg were thoroughly documented, a fact that lends tremendous weight to the historical reality of the plague. Town chroniclers, physicians, and poets recorded the bizarre happenings, trying to impose logic on the madness. The Chronica of Daniel Specklin. Specklin, a prominent Strasbourg historian, later compiled one of the most comprehensive accounts. He detailed the rapid escalation of the plague, noting the sheer exhaustion that preceded the eventual death of the afflicted. Specklin emphasized that the dancers showed signs of incredible suffering, not pleasure. They writhed and contorted, their faces etched with pain, reinforcing the idea that they were captive to their own bodies. He wrote of the public stages erected by the council, confirming the catastrophic decision to promote rather than prohibit the movement. The Strasbourg Council records, perhaps the most irrefutable evidence, comes from the city's official minutes and financial records. These documents prove the magistrate's intervention, detailing the cost of hiring musicians, clearing the market squares, and building the wooden platform. They document the decision to dance the sickness out. The records also reflect the dramatic shift in policy. The expenditure for musicians abruptly ceased, replaced by records showing payments for carts and services to transport the dancers to the secluded shrine at Saverne. This paper trail confirms the plague's severity and the panicked, contradictory responses of the authorities. The Poet's Lament. One anonymous chronicler captured the morbid spectacle in verse, lamenting the continuous, unstoppable nature of the dance. They came to dance without end and died without remorse. These poetic accounts often imbued the event with theological significance, viewing it as a clear sign of God's judgment upon a sinful city, further fueling the collective anxiety that was the plague's true progenitor. The consistency across these varied sources, from dry fiscal ledgers to dramatic poetry, makes the dancing plague a uniquely well-attested historical enigma, differentiating it from purely folkloric tales. Saint Vitus and the Medieval Mind. The authorities' decision to ultimately move the remaining dancers to the chapel of Saint Vitus in Saverne was not arbitrary. It was deeply rooted in the medieval cultural context, specifically the religious understanding of uncontrollable spasms and movement disorders. Saint Vitus was a 4th century Christian martyr whose cult gained prominence in Europe during the Middle Ages. His intercession was sought against a number of ailments, particularly those involving involuntary motion, such as epilepsy, seizures, and the nervous twitching condition that would eventually be named Saint Vitus's Dance, or Chorea Sancti Viti. By the 15th century, popular belief held that Saint Vitus had the power to both inflict and cure these uncontrollable movements. The logic was infliction. The sufferers were being punished by the saint for some unknown offense, or perhaps possessed by demons under the saint's power. Cure. Only by seeking refuge at his consecrated shrine, engaging in ritualistic cleansing and offering prayers, could the saint be appeased and the involuntary movement halted. The shift from the medical humoral approach, hot blood, to the spiritual exorcistic, Saint Vitus's curse, marked the turning point in the plague's trajectory. By transporting the afflicted to Saverne, the social context was broken. The dancers were removed from the high-stress, highly populated environment of Strasbourg's central squares. The absence of the crowd and the constant rhythm was critical. The trance was recontextualized. The dancing was reframed not as a fever to be burned out, but as a demonic possession to be driven out. The ritual, the red shoes, the holy oils, the quiet, repetitive prayers, was a form of intense psychological suggestion designed to break the hysterical trance. When the afflicted believed they were in a place where the cure had to work, where the saint's power could not be denied, their subconscious minds were finally allowed to relinquish control over their motor functions. The cure for the dancing plague, therefore, was not pharmacological or physical, but psychological and sociological. It was the manipulation of collective belief that finally calmed the overstressed, broken nervous systems of hundreds who had danced close to death. The socio-economic crucible of Strasbourg. The key ingredient that made Strasbourg so vulnerable to this massive outbreak of mass psychogenic illness was the intense socio-economic and political instability of the region in 1518. Famine and scarcity. The years leading up to 1518 had been marked by severe crop failures. This meant that the common populace was constantly on the brink of starvation. Malnutrition weakens the body, lowers resistance to real disease, and, crucially, affects the brain's ability to cope with stress. The psychological burden of knowing that one's children might starve, coupled with the real physical exhaustion of near famine, created a population with dangerously low emotional resilience. Religious tension and millennial fear. The early 15th century was the dawn of the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther had posted his 95 Theses just 1 year prior in 1517. Strasbourg was a city particularly sensitive to these theological upheavals. The conflict between the established Catholic Church and the emerging evangelical movements fueled a deep-seated spiritual anxiety. People saw every natural disaster, famine, disease, and the baffling dancing plague as a sign of the approaching end times or a direct manifestation of God's fury. This environment of heightened spiritual fear made the population far more receptive to the idea of curses, possession, and divine punishment. High density and social pressure. Strasbourg was a crowded, walled medieval city. The density of living, the lack of privacy, and the constant, close proximity of large numbers of people facilitated the rapid spread of the hysteria. In a modern context, mass hysteria is often confined to specific groups, a school, a factory floor. But in the 16th century, Strasbourg was the entire town living under one roof of communal stress. Once Frau Trophia began her solo dance, the sheer volume of anxious, malnourished witnesses created an immediate audience and a massive pool of potential participants. John Waller argues compellingly that the people of Strasbourg were primed for a physical reaction to their overwhelming stress. They lacked the modern vocabulary to process conditions like severe anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress. Instead, their distress was channeled through a familiar, culturally accepted medieval form of hysteria, the religious dance craze associated with St. Vitus. The mind, searching for an outlet for intolerable stress, provided the body with the only known script for such a breakdown.
The unsolved question: why dancing? While the mass psychogenic illness theory is widely accepted, the question remains: why did the hysteria manifest specifically as uncontrollable violent dancing? Why not mass screaming, fainting, or self-flagellation, which was also common in the Middle Ages? Historians suggest the answer lies in the specific history of dancing manias in the Rhine region. The dancing plague of 1518 was not the first instance of its kind. 1374 outbreak. A major outbreak occurred in Aachen and spread across the region, where people also began dancing uncontrollably in public. Tarantism. Though more prominent in southern Italy, the idea of being cured of a spider bite or a curse through manic ritualistic dancing, tarantella, was known. It seems that the cultural memory of these prior dancing epidemics, coupled with the legend of St. Vitus's dance, provided a readily available template for the expression of overwhelming anxiety. When Frau Trophea stepped into the street, she was, consciously or unconsciously, fulfilling a recognized, if terrifying, cultural script for breakdown. The fact that the authorities initially encouraged the movement cemented this pattern. They told the sufferers their only hope was more movement, thus reinforcing the very hysteria they sought to cure. The dancing plague of 1518 is a testament to the fact that the most frightening epidemics are not always those caused by external microbes, but those manufactured internally by the desperate conditions of human life. It stands as a chilling monument to collective psychological collapse, a time when an entire city was driven by fear to dance itself to death. The final bow, silence and survival in the aftermath. The silence that fell over Strasbourg in September 1518 was heavy, thick with communal guilt and unspoken trauma. The dancing plague had subsided, but the memory of the grotesque deaths and the bewildering madness lingered, forcing the city to reckon with its own fragility. The final phase of this historical event was one of recovery, repression, and enduring legacy. The repression of memory. Once the dancers were safely confined in Saverne and the rituals had begun to take effect, the city council and religious leaders of Strasbourg executed a swift and deliberate campaign of memory suppression. The official narrative shifted from hot blood and municipal failure to divine judgment and successful spiritual intervention. The reasoning was practical and political: avoidance of blame. The council did not want to be remembered as the body that caused the deaths by hiring musicians and building stages. By framing the event as a curse successfully lifted by St. Vitus, they deflected responsibility for their catastrophic policy error. Restoration of order. The Reformation was rapidly gaining ground, challenging the authority of the church and local rulers. To admit that hundreds died from mere stress or hot blood would suggest the leaders were unable to manage the city's fundamental well-being. Attributing the plague to a divine or demonic curse and then successfully ending it through Catholic ritual restored a sense of control and emphasized the power of the church. Communal amnesia. The event was simply too terrifying to process. The collective trauma of watching friends and neighbors literally dance until their hearts exploded led to a widespread psychological need to minimize the terror. Like many historical traumas, the simplest solution was to stop talking about it, to let the public memory fade into vague religious warning. Consequently, while the official records of the financial and logistical costs remained, the emotional and personal histories of the victims were largely excised from the public discourse. The hundreds of dead became footnotes in the historical register, casualties of an unnamed, forgotten terror. The survivors, a fractured recovery. What became of the hundreds of individuals who survived the ordeal, those who were carted off to the shrine in Saverne? Their recovery was not instantaneous. While the physical removal from the highly contagious environment of the city square stopped the spread, the underlying psychological trauma was immense. The involuntary muscle movements may have ceased, but the survivors were left physically devastated. Physical ailments. They suffered from chronic muscle damage, severe dehydration, and weakened hearts. Many would have taken months, perhaps years, to regain full physical strength. Mental scars. The experience of being trapped within one's own body, forced to move against one's will, is a form of torture. The survivors would have carried the deep psychological scars of dissociation, fear, and profound confusion. They had faced a unique kind of public shame. Their affliction was not hidden in a home, but performed violently in the public eye. Social ostracization. Despite being officially cured by St. Vitus, it is likely that many survivors were viewed with suspicion or fear by their neighbors. They were the ones who had been touched by the curse, and the anxiety over potential relapse would have been persistent. Historians suggest that the religious rituals at Saverne worked largely because they gave the survivors a framework for understanding their condition that offered hope and resolution. They were victims of a curse, but the saint had intervened. This powerful act of symbolic healing was the true antidote to the stress-induced trance. Echoes in the modern world, the human condition. The dancing plague of 1518 remains history's most powerful case study in the field of mass psychogenic illness and the study of human suggestibility. Its historical reality forces modern audiences to confront the idea that the mind, under extreme duress, can command the body to inflict fatal harm on itself. The legacy of the foot fever offers several key lessons for contemporary understanding. The mind-body connection.
It provides chilling proof that trauma and stress are not merely feelings, they are physical forces capable of inducing debilitating, even fatal physiological responses. The dancers were not faking it. Their stress was so severe that their brains literally bypassed their conscious control, resulting in motor commands that killed them. The power of authority. The city council's tragic decision to encourage the dancing demonstrates the overwhelming power of authority in an era of crisis. When leaders legitimize a bizarre behavior, in this case by providing stages and music, they transformed an isolated incident into a mass phenomenon. The role of context. The plague was unique to the socio-economic and religious anxieties of 16th century Europe. Today, MPI outbreaks still occur, but they take modern forms: mass fainting, non-specific rashes, or sudden localized tremors, reflecting current anxieties about pollution, corporate control, or chemical threats. The medium changes, but the underlying mechanism of extreme collective stress remains the same. The strange, terrible summer of 1518 in Strasbourg is more than a historical oddity. It is a vivid, tragic window into the hidden forces that shape human behavior. It tells the story of an entire city that, broken by famine and fear, turned on itself, only to be saved not by medicine, but by the power of belief. The music stopped, the stages were torn down, and the dancers were laid to rest. But the question posed by the USS Cyclops and the dancing plague alike remains. What happens when the ordinary mechanisms of the world, the stability of a massive ship, the rational control of one's own body, fail without warning, leaving behind only the chilling, absolute silence? The dancing plague is history's definitive statement that the human soul, when overloaded by suffering, can choose the most terrifying way to finally break free. The dance was the death, and the silence was the cure.